Based on the true story of Apollo 11, July 1969. The night of July 15, 1969, was unusually quiet along Florida's Space Coast. Thousands of people had already gathered on beaches, highways, and open fields near the Kennedy Space Center. Some had driven for days, others had traveled across the world. Hotels were full, parking lots overflowed. Many families simply slept inside their cars, unwilling to miss what they believed would become one of the greatest moments in human history. No one knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but everyone understood one thing. If everything went according to plan, human beings would leave Earth on a journey unlike any before. Just a few miles away, behind heavily guarded gates, the Saturn V rocket stood silently on Launch Complex 39A. At nearly 111 meters, 363 feet, it was taller than a 36-story building. Its massive white body reflected the floodlights surrounding the launch pad. Even standing still, it looked impossibly powerful. Inside it rested 3 astronauts, not yet aboard, but preparing for the mission that would define their lives forever. Their names were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Each had spent years preparing for this single flight. Thousands of engineers, scientists, technicians, doctors, and support staff had also dedicated countless hours to making this mission possible. Apollo 11 was never the achievement of 3 men alone. It represented the work of more than 400,000 people across the United States. Neil Armstrong was known for his calm personality. Friends often described him as someone who rarely raised his voice. He spoke carefully. He avoided attention whenever possible. Yet many who worked with him believed there was no better person to command such an important mission. Buzz Aldrin approached problems differently. He loved solving difficult engineering questions. His confidence inside the spacecraft had earned him enormous respect among fellow astronauts. Michael Collins carried perhaps the loneliest responsibility. While Armstrong and Aldrin planned to land on the moon, Collins would remain alone in lunar orbit aboard the command module Columbia. For nearly a full day, he would become the most isolated human being in history. The evening before launch was surprisingly ordinary. The astronauts ate a carefully planned dinner. Doctors performed final medical examinations. Mission specialists reviewed checklists one last time. Nothing was left to chance. Every switch, every button, every emergency procedure had been rehearsed again and again. Outside the launch center, television crews prepared their cameras. Millions of people across America planned to wake early the next morning. Around the world, newspapers printed special editions in anticipation of the launch. Children spoke about astronauts in classrooms. Families discussed the mission over dinner. For many, this wasn't just another space flight. It felt like history waiting to happen. Yet, despite all the excitement, there was also quiet concern. Spaceflight in the 1960s was still extremely dangerous. Only 2 years earlier, the crew of Apollo 1 had tragically lost their lives during a launch rehearsal after a cabin fire. That heartbreaking accident changed NASA forever. Engineers redesigned critical systems. Safety procedures became far stricter. Every lesson learned from tragedy was built into Apollo 11. As midnight approached, the launch pad remained brightly illuminated. The Saturn V stood motionless against the dark sky. Occasionally, clouds drifted overhead. A gentle breeze crossed the Atlantic coast. Technicians continued working through the night, checking fuel lines, electrical systems, communication equipment, computers. Nothing could be overlooked. Inside nearby crew quarters, the astronauts finally tried to sleep. Whether they truly slept well, no one could know. The next morning, they would climb aboard the most powerful rocket ever built. And if everything succeeded, humanity would begin its first journey to another world. Far beyond Earth's atmosphere, the moon quietly orbited as it always had. For billions of years, it had watched civilizations rise and disappear. Now, for the very first time, 3 human beings were preparing to visit it. And before sunrise on July 16, 1969, the countdown had already begun. Long before sunrise, the alarm clocks inside the astronauts' quarters quietly came to life. It was just after 4 o'clock in the morning on July 16, 1969. Outside, Florida was still wrapped in darkness. The Atlantic Ocean was calm. A warm summer breeze moved gently through the palm trees surrounding the Kennedy Space Center. For most people, it was just another Wednesday morning, but history was already awake. Neil Armstrong opened his eyes first. There was no dramatic speech, no celebration, only another carefully scheduled morning. Years of training had taught astronauts to treat extraordinary moments with ordinary discipline. Within minutes, Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were beginning the routine they had practiced countless times. NASA doctors performed one final medical check: heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature. Every reading was carefully recorded. The astronauts appeared calm. Mission controllers later remarked that their vital signs were remarkably steady considering what lay ahead. Breakfast was simple but carefully planned. Traditionally, astronauts ate steak and eggs before launch because the meal provided lasting energy and reduced the chance of stomach discomfort during flight. They also drank orange juice, coffee, and ate toast. Conversation remained light. There was laughter. Photographers quietly documented every moment. Looking back at those photographs today, it's difficult to imagine that these ordinary breakfast scenes came just hours before one of history's greatest journeys. After breakfast, the astronauts suited up. The white Apollo pressure suits were far more than uniforms. They were miniature life support systems. Each suit weighed around 20 kilograms and was designed to protect its wearer from the vacuum of space if cabin pressure was ever lost. Technicians spent nearly an hour helping each astronaut into every layer of equipment. Every zipper, every glove, every connection. Everything had to be perfect. Outside, thousands more spectators continued arriving. Roads leading toward the launch site became crowded. Boats filled nearby rivers. Families unfolded lawn chairs. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Some people carried binoculars. Others simply stared toward the towering Saturn V standing against the brightening morning sky. Television cameras from around the world had already gone live. Millions of viewers watched the launch preparations from their homes. For many families, breakfast was eaten in front of the television. Teachers rolled televisions into classrooms. Factories adjusted work schedules. Even people who had never followed space exploration wanted to witness what was about to happen. At approximately 6:30 a.m., the astronauts left the operations and checkout building. Outside waited the famous silver transfer van. It looked surprisingly ordinary, yet that short drive would become one of the most famous rides in history. As the van slowly moved toward Launch Complex 39A, photographers lined the roadway. Workers paused to wave. The astronauts smiled back through the windows. No one knew whether they would return safely. Then, the rocket came into full view. Even after years of training, Saturn V never failed to impress those standing beside it. Its engines alone were taller than many buildings. More than 3 million liters of fuel filled its tanks. Standing at its base, people often described feeling incredibly small. An elevator carried Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins nearly 320 feet above the ground. The higher they climbed, the smaller the people below appeared. The Atlantic Ocean stretched across the eastern horizon. Morning sunlight reflected off the water. The view was peaceful, almost too peaceful. One by one, the astronauts crawled through a narrow hatch into the spacecraft. Michael Collins entered first, then Buzz Aldrin, finally Neil Armstrong. Technicians carefully sealed the hatch behind them. From that moment forward, there was no easy way back. Inside the spacecraft, the cabin was compact, far smaller than many people imagined. The astronauts lay on their back, surrounded by hundreds of switches, gauges, circuit breakers, and control panels. Everything was exactly where years of training had taught them it would be. Outside, technicians disconnected the final support equipment. Slowly, the launch tower came alive. Fuel continued flowing into the enormous rocket. Computers constantly checked thousands of measurements every second. Mission Control in Houston monitored every system. If even one critical component failed, the launch could be delayed instantly. Across America, people waited. Some held cameras. Some held newspapers. Some simply held their breath. No human being had ever attempted exactly what Apollo 11 was about to do. Every previous mission had been another step leading here. Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. Now, everything depended on a single launch. The countdown continued. T-minus 30 minutes. The astronauts completed one checklist after another. Mission Control responded calmly to every report. There was no unnecessary conversation, only short, precise communication. Every word mattered. Far beyond Earth, the Moon continued its silent orbit, unchanged, patient, waiting. It had no idea that, in less than 4 days, human footprints would mark its surface for the very first time. The final minutes approached. Outside, the crowd became unusually quiet. Even children stopped talking. It felt as though the entire world was listening to the same heartbeat. Then the loudspeakers announced, T-minus 60 seconds. Steam poured from the base of the Saturn V. The 5 enormous F-1 engines were seconds away from ignition. The launch pad shook gently as the rocket completed its final automated checks. For Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, there was nothing left to do but wait. And for everyone watching, the next 60 seconds would become unforgettable. For one long moment, nothing happened. The countdown reached its final seconds. Inside the spacecraft, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins remained completely still. Their voices over the radio were calm. Years of preparation had led to these final moments. Outside, more than 1 million spectators stood silently across Florida's Space Coast. Television cameras were broadcasting live to millions more around the world. The enormous Saturn V rocket waited beneath the morning sky. 10, 9. The final automatic systems took control. Human hands were no longer guiding the launch sequence. Thousands of sensors checked pressure, temperature, fuel flow, and electrical systems in fractions of a second. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. 5. The 5 massive F-1 engines beneath the Saturn V ignited. For a brief moment, the rocket did not move. Instead, flames wider than a football field burst from beneath the launch pad. Nearly 7.5 million pounds of thrust pushed downward against the Earth. The ground itself began to tremble. Windows rattled miles away. People watching from nearby beaches later said they could feel the vibration in their chests before they truly heard it. Then, slowly, almost gracefully, the Saturn V began to rise. At 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 left Earth. The launch was far slower than many people imagined. For the first few seconds, the rocket seemed almost reluctant to climb. But second by second, it gathered speed. The enormous vehicle cleared the launch tower and leaned gently toward the Atlantic Ocean, following its carefully planned flight path. Mission Control remained remarkably calm. Every few seconds, new information appeared on computer screens. Altitude, velocity, fuel consumption, engine performance. Everything continued exactly as expected. Inside the spacecraft, the astronauts experienced powerful vibrations. The entire vehicle shook continuously as millions of kilograms of fuel burned beneath them. Neil Armstrong later described the ride as rough but manageable. Every checklist continued exactly on schedule. There was little time to admire the view. Every second required attention. Outside, the roar reached the crowd. It wasn't simply loud, it was physical. People felt the sound long before it faded into the distance. Children covered their ears. Many adults stood completely speechless. Others applauded as tears filled their eyes. For countless spectators, this was more than a rocket launch. It felt like witnessing humanity take another step into the unknown. Within 2.5 minutes, the first stage had completed its job. Having burned nearly all its fuel, it separated from the rocket exactly as planned. The enormous booster fell harmlessly into the Atlantic Ocean hundreds of kilometers away. Moments later, the second stage engines ignited. The journey continued. Far below, Earth already looked different. Florida's coastline slowly disappeared beneath thin clouds. The blue Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The astronauts had trained for this view for years, yet nothing could truly prepare anyone for seeing their home planet from above. Michael Collins carefully monitored the spacecraft systems. Buzz Aldrin checked guidance instruments. Neil Armstrong communicated regularly with Mission Control in Houston. The conversations remained calm, professional, and surprisingly ordinary. That was NASA's way. No unnecessary drama, only clear communication. Less than 12 minutes after liftoff, Apollo 11 reached Earth orbit. The spacecraft was now traveling at roughly 0.000 kilometers per hour, fast enough to circle the Earth in about 90 minutes. For a short time, the astronauts simply orbited the planet. This was intentional. Engineers carefully checked every major system before committing the crew to the much longer journey toward the Moon. If any serious problem had appeared now, the astronauts could still return safely. Fortunately, everything looked excellent. As the spacecraft crossed over oceans and continents, the crew caught brief glimpses through the windows. Earth appeared peaceful. Borders were invisible. Cities could not be distinguished. Only swirling white clouds above deep blue oceans and vast stretches of land. Years later, many astronauts would describe this perspective as life-changing. Looking back at Earth from space often created a profound appreciation for how small and fragile our world truly is. After completing 1.5 orbits around Earth, Mission Control prepared for the next critical step. It was called translunar injection. Without this engine burn, Apollo 11 would simply continue circling Earth. With it, the spacecraft would leave Earth's orbit forever and begin its journey toward the Moon. The astronauts carefully reviewed every checklist once more. Every number, every switch, every confirmation. There could be no mistakes. The third stage engine ignited exactly on schedule. For several long minutes, the spacecraft accelerated steadily. Then, the engine shut down. Mission Control quickly analyzed the data. The answer came only moments later. Apollo 11 had achieved the correct trajectory. The spacecraft was now officially on its way to the Moon. For the first time in human history, a crew carrying the hope of an entire planet was traveling toward another world. Behind them, Earth slowly became smaller. Ahead, the Moon grew a little larger with every passing hour. And somewhere in the quiet darkness between the two worlds, 3 astronauts settled into the long journey that would change history forever. The powerful engine had fallen silent. For the first time since leaving Earth, there was almost complete quiet. Not because the spacecraft had stopped moving. In fact, Apollo 11 was now traveling at more than 39,000 kilometers per hour, racing toward the Moon. But in the vacuum of space, there is no air to carry sound. Outside the spacecraft, there was only silence. An endless, peaceful silence that stretched farther than the imagination could reach. Inside the command module Columbia, life became surprisingly ordinary. The intense excitement of launch was over. Now came the longest part of the mission, the journey itself. It would take nearly 4 days to reach the moon. During that time, the astronauts followed a carefully planned schedule. They checked instruments, recorded observations, ate meals, rested, and occasionally looked through the small spacecraft windows at the incredible view beyond. Every few hours, Mission Control in Houston contacted the crew. The conversations were calm and professional. Engineers on Earth monitored thousands of pieces of information sent back by the spacecraft. Electrical systems, fuel cells, navigation, temperature, communication. Everything was working remarkably well. Apollo 11 was performing almost exactly as its designers had hoped. One important task during the journey was a slow, graceful maneuver called the passive thermal control roll. Astronauts often nicknamed it the barbecue roll. The spacecraft slowly rotated on its axis, only a few degrees every minute. This gentle spin prevented one side from becoming too hot in sunlight, while the other side became too cold in darkness. From outside, Apollo 11 would have appeared like a tiny silver object quietly turning through the endless blackness of space. Meals aboard the spacecraft were simple. Food came in sealed packages. Some items were freeze-dried and required water before eating. Others were ready to eat immediately. It was not gourmet dining, but it provided the nutrition needed for the journey. The astronauts occasionally joked with one another while eating. Small moments of humor helped make the tiny spacecraft feel a little more like home. Living inside Columbia required constant adaptation. There was no up or down. Everything floated. Pens drifted through the cabin. Checklists had to be secured with clips. Even tiny drops of water became perfect floating spheres. Every movement had to be slow and deliberate. A simple push with one finger could send a person drifting gently across the cabin. Whenever they had free moments, the astronauts looked outside. At first, Earth filled much of the window. Its brilliant blue oceans, white cloud systems, and brown continents looked almost unreal. The colors seemed brighter than any photograph could capture. There were no borders, no roads, no signs of conflict. Only one beautiful world floating alone in the darkness. Hour after hour, Earth slowly became smaller. The moon slowly became larger. It was a change almost too gradual to notice. But every time the astronauts looked outside, they could see the difference. Behind them was home. Ahead of them was a place no human being had ever walked. Michael Collins spent much of the journey carefully monitoring Columbia. Although Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would become the first men to land on the moon, Collins carried an equally important responsibility. Without him, there would be no safe journey home. Every system inside the command module depended on his careful attention. Meanwhile, Armstrong and Aldrin continued reviewing procedures for the lunar landing. They studied checklists again and again. Every switch, every engine command, every emergency procedure. Nothing was left to memory alone. The moon allowed no room for careless mistakes. Occasionally, the astronauts took photographs through the spacecraft windows. Some captured the shrinking Earth, others focused on the growing moon. These images would later become some of the most famous photographs ever taken. They reminded millions of people how small our planet truly is. As the spacecraft traveled farther from Earth, radio signals took longer to arrive. Communication remained clear. But there was now a noticeable pause between questions and answers. It was a quiet reminder that the astronauts were moving farther away than any humans had ever traveled before. Sleep came in short periods. Without gravity, there were no beds. Each astronaut secured himself inside a sleeping bag attached to the spacecraft. There was no sensation of lying down. Instead, they simply floated peacefully in place. Many astronauts later described sleeping in weightlessness as surprisingly comfortable. Without pressure against the body, every position felt equally relaxing. Outside, stars appeared different than they did from Earth. Without an atmosphere, they did not twinkle. They shone steadily, sharp, clear, unchanging. The darkness between them was deeper than any night sky seen from Earth. It was a silence that seemed almost timeless. During one quiet moment, Neil Armstrong looked back toward Earth. From this distance, the planet had become only a small blue sphere suspended in endless darkness. Some later reflected that this view changed how they thought about humanity forever. Every city, every mountain, every ocean, every family, every story in human history was contained within that tiny blue world. As July 18th turned into July 19th, the moon now dominated the view outside the spacecraft. Its craters, mountains, and vast gray plains became clearer with every passing hour. What had once appeared as a bright circle in Earth's night sky now looked like an enormous world waiting just ahead. The journey was almost complete. Soon, Apollo 11 would leave its path through deep space and enter lunar orbit. And then, history would take its next unforgettable step. By the morning of July 19, 1969, the moon no longer looked distant. It filled much of the spacecraft's windows. For nearly 4 days, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins had traveled through the quiet darkness between two worlds. Now their destination was finally close. Outside, the moon revealed details that no telescope on Earth could ever fully capture. Ancient craters stretched for miles. Long mountain ridges cast deep shadows across the gray surface. Vast lava plains, formed billions of years earlier, spread silently beneath them. There was no wind, no rivers, no sound. Only a world that had remained almost unchanged for billions of years. As Apollo 11 approached the moon, Mission Control in Houston prepared for one of the most important engine burns of the entire mission. If this maneuver failed, the spacecraft would not enter lunar orbit. Instead, it would continue past the moon and drift back into deep space. Every calculation had been checked repeatedly by NASA engineers. Even so, everyone understood how much depended on the next few minutes. At the planned moment, the spacecraft passed behind the far side of the moon. For the first time since launch, radio communication with Earth disappeared. The moon itself blocked the signal. Inside Mission Control, the room became unusually quiet. No one on Earth could speak to the astronauts. No one could hear them. For several long minutes, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins were completely alone. Only after Apollo 11 emerged from behind the moon did radio contact return. The engine burn had been successful. Apollo 11 was now in lunar orbit. Human beings were circling another world for the first time with the goal of landing on it. Over the next several hours, the astronauts carefully observed the surface below. They searched for familiar landmarks they had studied during years of training. The planned landing site lay inside a broad lava plain known as the Sea of Tranquility. Despite its name, it was not a sea of water. It was an ancient volcanic plain, formed billions of years ago. Its relatively smooth terrain made it one of the safest places available for the first lunar landing. Soon, the crew began preparing the lunar module Eagle. Unlike Columbia, Eagle had been designed only for space and the moon. It could never fly through Earth's atmosphere. Its single purpose was to carry 2 astronauts safely to the lunar surface and back into orbit again. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin carefully crawled into Eagle through a narrow tunnel connecting the 2 spacecraft. Michael Collins remained aboard Columbia. His responsibility now became even greater. He would continue orbiting the moon alone while waiting for Eagle to return. If anything prevented Armstrong and Aldrin from lifting off again, Collins could not land to rescue them. It was one of the hardest realities of the mission. Before separation, the 3 astronauts exchanged calm, professional words. There was no dramatic farewell, only careful checklists and final confirmations. After years of training together, they trusted one another completely. Then, the docking latches released. Slowly, Eagle drifted away from Columbia. For the first time, the spacecraft became 2 separate vehicles. Michael Collins watched from his window as Eagle moved gracefully against the blackness of space. He later wrote that, although he was physically alone, he never felt lonely. His focus remained entirely on his work. Inside Eagle, Armstrong and Aldrin began their descent preparations. Every instrument was checked again. Fuel levels, electrical systems, guidance computer, radar, communications. Everything appeared ready. Outside the windows, the moon's surface grew closer with every passing minute. Then, at the scheduled time, Eagle fired its descent engine. The landing had begun. Slowly at first, then steadily. The spacecraft descended toward the Sea of Tranquility. Mission Control followed every number arriving from the spacecraft. Altitude, velocity, fuel, everything looked normal. Until suddenly, a warning appeared. Program alarm, 1202. Inside Mission Control, engineers reacted immediately. The onboard guidance computer had become overloaded with more data than expected. For a few tense moments, no one knew whether the landing should be aborted. Within seconds, computer specialist Steve Bales and his team confirmed that the computer was still functioning correctly. The alarm could safely be ignored. Mission Control radioed back, "We're go." The descent continued. Moments later, another alarm appeared, 12:01. Again, Mission Control analyzed the data. Again, the answer came back, "Continue." Years later, many engineers would remember those few seconds as some of the most stressful of the entire Apollo program. As Eagle dropped lower, Neil Armstrong looked through the window. Something immediately caught his attention. The computer was guiding them toward a crater filled with large rocks and boulders. Landing there could damage the spacecraft. Without hesitation, Armstrong took manual control. Gently, he flew Eagle beyond the rocky area, searching for a safer place. Every second mattered. Every movement consumed precious fuel. Mission Control watched the fuel readings fall. 60 seconds of fuel remained. Then, 30 seconds. The room in Houston grew silent. No one wanted to interrupt Armstrong's concentration. Finally, dust began rising beneath Eagle's engine. The lunar surface was only a few feet below. Then, at 2017 Coordinated Universal Time on July 20th, 1969, a calm voice came over the radio. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." For a brief moment, nobody in Mission Control spoke. Then applause erupted across the room. After years of work by hundreds of thousands of people, human beings had successfully landed on the moon. But one final step still remained. The hatch had not yet opened. No footprints had yet touched the lunar dust. Outside Eagle, the silent surface of the moon waited patiently. And somewhere above, Michael Collins continued circling alone aboard Columbia, watching over his two crewmates. In only a little while, Neil Armstrong would climb down a small ladder and change human history forever. For a little while, nothing happened. Although Eagle had safely landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did not immediately climb outside. There was still work to do. They carefully checked the spacecraft systems, made sure Eagle was stable, reviewed the procedures one final time. Mission Control wanted everything to be perfect before the hatch was opened. Outside, the moon remained completely silent. Its gray surface stretched in every direction beneath a black sky where no clouds ever drifted and no wind ever blew. Hours later, Neil Armstrong slowly opened the hatch. Carefully, he turned and began climbing backward down Eagle's narrow ladder. Each movement was deliberate. His bulky spacesuit limited every step. Below him lay a fine layer of lunar dust that had remained untouched for billions of years. Near the bottom of the ladder, Armstrong paused briefly. Then he stepped from the final rung onto the moon. At 2:56 Coordinated Universal Time on July 21st, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human being to walk on another world. His first words would become some of the most famous ever spoken. "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Millions of people around the world listened through radios and televisions. The images were grainy and black and white, yet despite their limited quality, they carried extraordinary meaning. For the first time in history, human footprints marked the surface of the moon. Armstrong spent the first few minutes making sure he could move safely. He described the moon's gravity, only about 1/6 of Earth's, as surprisingly comfortable. Walking felt different. Each step became a gentle hop. The fine lunar soil compressed beneath his boots, leaving crisp footprints that would remain for an incredibly long time, because the moon has virtually no wind or rain to erase them. A short time later, Buzz Aldrin climbed down the ladder and joined Armstrong on the surface. Looking across the landscape, Aldrin later described it as magnificent desolation. The phrase captured the moon perfectly. Beautiful, silent, empty. A place unlike anywhere on Earth. Together, the two astronauts began carrying out the scientific work they had trained for over many years. They collected rock and soil samples from different locations. These samples would later help scientists better understand the moon's history and the early formation of our solar system. They also deployed scientific instruments designed to continue collecting data long after Apollo 11 had departed. One of the most important instruments was a passive seismometer, which could detect moonquakes and other vibrations beneath the lunar surface. Another was a laser reflector. Even today, scientists continue to use these reflectors by bouncing laser beams off them from Earth to measure the distance to the moon with extraordinary precision. More than half a century later, those reflectors are still there. The astronauts also planted the American flag. It was a symbolic moment, but NASA emphasized that Apollo 11 had come in peace. A small plaque attached to Eagle's landing leg reflected that message. It read, "We came in peace for all mankind." The words represented the spirit of exploration rather than conquest. Meanwhile, high above the moon, Michael Collins continued orbiting alone aboard Columbia. Every 2 hours, he disappeared behind the far side of the moon, completely out of radio contact with both Earth and Eagle. For those brief periods, Collins became one of the most isolated people in human history. Yet he carried out his responsibilities flawlessly. His careful work would make the return journey possible. After spending about 2.5 hours outside Eagle, Armstrong and Aldrin climbed back inside. They carefully secured the precious rock samples, scientific records, and film. Then, after a period of rest, Eagle's ascent engine ignited exactly as planned. The lower half of the lunar module remained behind forever. The upper half lifted gracefully away from the moon. Soon, Eagle successfully docked once again with Columbia. The three astronauts were reunited. Their next destination? Home. The return journey was quieter. Much of the tension had passed. There were still many important procedures to complete, but the hardest part of the mission was behind them. As Apollo 11 traveled back across the nearly 384,000 kilometers between the Moon and Earth, the blue planet slowly grew larger in the spacecraft windows. For the astronauts, home had never looked more beautiful. On July 24, 1969, Apollo 11 reached Earth. The command module separated from the service module and plunged into the atmosphere at incredible speed. The outside of the capsule became surrounded by a blazing shell of superheated plasma. For several minutes, radio communication was lost, a normal part of re-entry. Then, the parachutes opened exactly as planned. 3 enormous red and white parachutes slowed Columbia's descent over the Pacific Ocean. Moments later, the spacecraft splashed gently into the sea. Recovery teams from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet quickly reached the capsule. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were safely home. As a precaution, the astronauts spent several days in quarantine. At the time, scientists could not completely rule out the possibility of unknown lunar microorganisms, even though no evidence suggested they existed. The quarantine was simply an extra measure of safety. Apollo 11 changed the world. It demonstrated what careful planning, scientific curiosity, engineering, and international inspiration could achieve. It inspired countless young people to study science, engineering, astronomy, and mathematics. Many later credited Apollo 11 with influencing the careers that shaped modern technology. Today, the footprints left by Armstrong and Aldrin are almost certainly still resting quietly on the moon. The landing sites, scientific instruments, and laser reflectors remain there as silent reminders of that extraordinary journey. The moon still rises over Earth almost every night, just as it did before Apollo 11. But since July 1969, whenever we look up, we know something remarkable. Human beings have been there. And somewhere beyond the noise of everyday life, the story of Apollo 11 remains a gentle reminder that some of humanity's greatest achievements began not with certainty, but with curiosity, patience, and the courage to take one careful step into the unknown. The end.